The HOA sent their fake cops to tow my boat right out of my own ranch lake, but they had no idea my SWAT team was already in position. I was just having my morning coffee when a tow barge pulled up to my private dock. These guys in knockoff lake patrol vests told me I was in violation and tried to seize the boat my wife and I loved. They thought I was just some old man they could push around. They didn't know every move they made was being recorded, or that their little towing stunt was the final piece of evidence in an ongoing racketeering investigation. How do you stop a wolf when it's wearing a uniform? Where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments, because you're about to see how it's done. The clock on the kitchen wall read 8:12 a.m. It was a perfect Saturday. The sun was up, the sky was clear, and a gentle steam rose from the coffee in my hand. From my deck, I could see the entire lake, calm and quiet, just the way my late wife Sarah had loved it. She used to say the water held the memory of the day, and this one felt like it would be a good one to remember. That's when I heard it. A low, grumbling sound that didn't belong. Not a car on the main road, not a neighbor's lawnmower. It was the distinct, throaty idle of a diesel engine, close by, down at my dock. I put my mug down and walked to the edge of the deck, squinting against the morning glare. My heart didn't race. 30 years in law enforcement, most of them in SWAT, had trained that out of me. Instead, a cold, methodical stillness settled in. You don't get surprise parties from diesel engines at your private dock. You get problems. And there it was. A squat, flatbed tow barge was nosed right up against my pilings, its engine churning the placid water into a muddy froth. 2 men stood on its deck. They wore reflective yellow vests with crudely stitched patches on the chest that read Lake Patrol. One was a thick, burly man with a flushed face and a look of impatient authority. The other was younger, thinner, and seemed to be taking his cues from his partner. The burly one hopped onto my dock like he owned it, his heavy boots thudding on the weathered planks. I walked down the grass slope to meet him, my movements deliberate. There was no point in shouting from the deck. You learn more when you're close enough to see their eyes. He didn't offer a handshake. He just pointed a thick finger at my boat, a 20-foot runabout, tied securely in its slip. That watercraft is in violation of the Community Watercraft Ordinance, he announced, his voice loud, designed to carry and intimidate. We're here to impound it. I looked from him to my boat, then back again. My boat was clean, registered, and sitting in the water of a lake my grandfather had bought 60 years ago, a lake my deed confirmed was my property down to the bedrock. I'm not aware of any such ordinance, I said, keeping my tone even. And you're on private property. He smirked, a little twitch at the corner of his mouth. He was used to people arguing. He seemed to enjoy it. New rules, he said, pulling a folded piece of paper from his back pocket. Lake access is managed by the Homeowners Association now, for community safety. He thrust the paper at me. It was a photocopy, still warm, the ink slightly smeared. The heading read, Community Watercraft Ordinance, and below it was a list of new regulations. My boat, apparently, was too long, too heavy, and improperly moored according to these brand new rules. I scanned down to the bottom of the page. There was no official letterhead, no county seal, just a typed date from that very morning. And where a signature should have been, there was only a blank line. This was a classic bluff, a piece of paper meant to look official to anyone who didn't know better. This isn't an official document, I stated, handing it back to him. It's not signed. It's not dated by any authority other than whoever typed it today. I need to see your written authority to be on my property and to touch my boat. The man's face reddened, a shade darker. The smirk vanished. We are the authority, he grunted. We're the HOA compliance team. The younger man behind him shifted his weight, looking out at the lake as if suddenly interested in the bird life. He didn't want to be part of this conversation. This was the point where things usually go one of two ways. They escalate with noise and threats, or they try another angle. I decided to give them a calm way out, an off-ramp before things got dumber. "I'm going to call the HOA president," I said, pulling out my phone. "Let's clear this up." The burly man, who I'd later learn was named Ron Beasley, folded his arms, confident. "Go ahead. Marla knows all about this." I dialed the number for Marla Jeffers, the HOA president, a woman whose polished newsletters always talked about community harmony, while her actions seemed to sow nothing but discord. She answered on the third ring, her voice smooth as honey. I explained the situation calmly. A tow barge at my private dock, 2 men claiming authority they couldn't prove, and a bogus ordinance. Marla listened, punctuating my story with little sounds of concern. "Oh my," she said when I finished. "That sounds like a terrible mix-up, Jack. I'm so sorry. The Lake Patrol is a new initiative, for safety. They must have gotten their boundaries wrong. They're not supposed to be anywhere near the private deed lakeshores." Her voice was pure performance, every word coated in a layer of plausible deniability. "Tell them," I said, "to stand down," she continued. "I'll sort this out internally. We'll hold off. Just a simple misunderstanding." I watched Ron Beasley as I listened to her. A flicker of hope, or maybe just wishful thinking, passed through me. Maybe it was just a mistake. Maybe her ambition had simply outpaced her competence. "I'll let them know," I said, and hung up. I looked at Beasley. "The president says it's a mix-up. She said you're to stand down and hold off." For a second, he looked confused, then annoyed. He seemed genuinely surprised. He was a foot soldier who had just been told the invasion was canceled. He grumbled something to his partner. It felt like a small victory. They were about to pack up their sham operation and leave my property. My boat was safe. The quiet of the morning would return. But then, just as I thought it was over, I saw it. The shift. Beasley turned his back to me slightly, bringing a small radio to his mouth so discreetly he probably thought I couldn't see. He shielded it with his hand, whispering a few words into it. His eyes weren't looking at his partner or his barge. They were scanning the far bank of the lake, over by the dense reeds that lined the public access portion of the shore. I followed his gaze. For a moment, there was nothing. Just the gentle sway of the cattails in the breeze. Then I saw a flicker of movement. A small, dark-hulled skiff, almost perfectly hidden in the shadows of the overhanging willows, began to move. It wasn't moving toward us. It was repositioning, sliding silently deeper into a cove, like a predator adjusting its ambush. It had been waiting there the whole time. This wasn't a mix-up. This was a planned operation. Marla's phone call hadn't been a retreat. It was a tactical pause. The men at my dock were just the first wave. The noisy distraction. The real move was supposed to come from somewhere else. My blood didn't run cold. It did something else. It sharpened. The quiet morning, the coffee, the memory of Sarah, all of it solidified into a hard, clear resolve. They weren't just after my boat, they were testing me. And they had no idea who they were dealing with. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was an opening move. And my turn was next. Ron Beasley and his partner climbed back onto their barge, with a lot less swagger than they'd arrived with. The diesel engine grumbled back to life, and the barge backed away from my dock, leaving a greasy swirl in the water. They didn't look at me as they left. They just focused on getting their vessel turned around and heading back toward the public launch. But I wasn't watching them. My eyes were fixed on the far shoreline where that hidden skiff had been. It was gone. It had slipped back into the reeds as silently as it appeared, melting away the moment Beasley spoke into his radio. The threat wasn't over. It had just pulled back into the shadows to wait. I went back inside, the coffee on my deck now cold. The brief sense of relief I'd felt after Marla Jeffers' phone call was completely gone, replaced by a cold, hard certainty. That phone call wasn't an apology. It was an audible retreat, a signal to the hidden part of her team. They were testing my response, seeing how I'd react, and they had tipped their hand. You don't bring in a hidden boat for a simple mix-up. You bring it in for a reason. My security system isn't just a doorbell camera. It's a network of motion-activated, high-definition cameras that cover the entire property line, the dock, and the approach from the lake. I had them installed a few years back, after Sarah passed. The quiet of the place felt different then, bigger and more vulnerable. Now, I sat down at my desk and pulled up the archived footage. Not from today, but from the weeks prior. Patience is the first rule of observation. You don't just look for what you expect to see. You look for what isn't supposed to be there. I spent the next 2 hours scrolling through nighttime footage, the black and white images timestamped in the corner. For weeks, it was nothing but deer, raccoons, and the occasional owl. And then I found it. 2 weeks ago, at 2:14 a.m., a video file showed 2 figures in a small boat, the same dark-hulled skiff I'd just seen, drifting without its engine, paddling quietly toward my dock. The night vision was crisp enough to make out their shapes. One of them was Ron Beasley. They didn't come ashore. They just hovered about 20 feet out, one of them using a pair of binoculars to examine the cleats on my dock and the lock on my boat's cover. They were scouting. They checked the lines, the lighting from the house, the camera placements they could spot. This wasn't a spontaneous act of HOA overreach. This was a planned seizure, and they'd done their homework. They just didn't know I had done mine. An enemy you can see is a problem. An enemy with a pattern is a problem you can solve. I knew then I couldn't be their only target. A system like this, a shakedown disguised as community compliance, needs to be profitable. It needs volume. I walked over to my next-door neighbor's house. Earl Maddox was out in his yard, fixing a sprinkler head. Earl's a retired dock builder, a man whose hands have forgotten more about lakefront construction than most people ever learn. He's quiet, observant, and he loves the water. Earl, I said, getting straight to the point, have you had any strange visits from the HOA lately? He looked up, wiped his hands on a rag, and his friendly expression tightened. You too? He said. He told me that 2 of his kayaks had vanished from his dock a month ago. He thought they'd been stolen. Then, a week later, he got a violation notice in the mail from the HOA, fining him $200 for having unsecured watercraft on his property. When he called Marla Jeffers to complain, she'd offered him a deal. She would graciously waive the fine if he'd sign a new shoreline maintenance agreement, giving the HOA the right to make safety improvements to his dock at their discretion, with costs billed to him. Earl had refused. A few days later, another neighbor, a widow named Mrs. Gable, had her dock repaired without her consent. 2 men showed up, replaced 3 perfectly good boards, and left a $500 invoice in her mailbox. The crew matched the description of Beasley and his partner. It was all there, a clear pattern of intimidation, seizure, and invoicing. They were using fake violations to leverage homeowners into signing away their property rights or to justify bogus repair bills. They weren't just taking boats. They were building a revenue stream out of thin air, funded by fear. My boat was just the biggest, most visible prize. Taking it would have been a public demonstration of Marla's power, a warning to everyone else on the lake. If I can take Jack Rourke's boat, I can take anything from you. My mind went back to my time on the force. This felt familiar. It had the same structure as a racketeering operation, a series of small, seemingly unrelated crimes that, when viewed together, reveal a coordinated criminal enterprise. But I needed more than neighborly stories and my own security footage. I needed to know what their next official move was. I needed to see the paperwork they thought would give them the win. I called an old contact at the sheriff's office, Sergeant Dana Cole. Dana is sharp, by the book, and has no patience for people who twist the law into a weapon. I didn't ask her to intervene. I just told her what happened and asked if the HOA had filed any official complaints or orders against my property address. That's public record. I was just asking a friend to look it up for me. She said she'd check. An hour later, my phone rang. It was Dana. Her voice was different. It wasn't just professional, it was urgent. "Jack, you were right to call," she said. "There's nothing officially filed with the court. No warrants, no seizure orders, nothing legit with a judge's signature on it." I felt a brief moment of vindication, but she cut it short. "But that's not the whole story," she continued, her voice lower. "I have a friend who works in the clerk's office. She sees the drafts before they get filed. Jack, there's an emergency court order application sitting in their system. It's got your name and your property address on it. It's an order to seize your boat and secure your dock, citing navigational hazards and community ordinance violations." She paused, letting the weight of it sink in. "It hasn't been filed with a judge yet. It's just waiting. Like a loaded gun sitting on a table, waiting for someone to pick it up. They're building a file, Jack. And they're just one manufactured emergency away from trying to make it look legal." A cold wave washed over me. They didn't just have a plan. They had a weaponized document, ready to be deployed. They were going to create a crisis, then use their pre-written paperwork to justify the crime after the fact. But now I knew. They thought they were laying a trap for me, but they had just walked straight into mine. Knowing there was an unfiled court order with my name on it changed everything. Marla Jeffers and her crew weren't just bullies. They were building a legal-looking cage and waiting for the right moment to spring the trap. A man with a badge on his chest is an official. A man with a piece of paper a judge signed is an army. I knew I couldn't just wait for them to make their move. I had to build a better cage first. You don't stop a tactical problem with an argument. You stop it with a superior tactical plan. It was time to call in my team. My first and only call was to Frank Calder. Frank and I came up together in SWAT. We'd been the last two men out of a burning warehouse more than once, and I trusted him with my life without a second thought. After he retired, he opened a private security consulting firm with a few other old hands. They were the best at what they did: surveillance, counter-surveillance, and making sure that when things went sideways, the good guys had proof. I laid it out for him on the phone. No emotion, just the facts. The barge, the fake ordnance, the scouting skiff, and the unfiled court order waiting for an excuse. Frank was quiet for a moment. Then he just said, "I'll bring the boys. We'll be there tomorrow at dawn. Have coffee ready." He didn't ask if I was sure. He didn't ask what I wanted him to do. He just knew. That's the thing about men you've served with. The conversation is mostly silence, and the trust is absolute. The next morning, a plain work van with no logos pulled into my driveway. Frank got out, looking exactly the same, just with a few more miles on the odometer. With him were two others I knew from the old days, both quiet, capable men who moved with a purpose. They shook my hand, accepted a cup of coffee, and then we got to work. They weren't there to offer opinions. They were there to build the net. For the next 5 hours, they turned my property into a fortress of observation. They installed 4 new motion-triggered cameras, smaller and harder to spot than my existing ones. One was tucked into a knothole of an old oak tree overlooking the path to the dock. Another was disguised as a birdhouse near the shoreline. Frank's specialty was the boathouse. He climbed into the small loft, a space I only used for storing old life vests and fishing gear. He set up a discreet observation post, a small, dark space with a perfect view of my dock, my boat, and the entire stretch of lake where the skiff had appeared. It was invisible from the outside. Anyone on the water would just see a dusty window. From the inside, it was the best seat in the house. As we worked, I showed him my existing system for saving the video files from my cameras. I explained how I backed everything up at the end of each day. This is the part that trips most people up, but it's the most important step. It's how you prove what happened. I keep all the time-stamped video files in 2 separate locations. One copy automatically uploads to a secure cloud server, the kind that costs a few dollars a month. The second copy I save to an offline hard drive, a little brick of plastic and metal that I keep in a fireproof safe in my office. Frank nodded in approval. 1 is none, 2 is 1, he said, repeating the old rule. If there's a fire, a flood, or if someone breaks in and steals your computer, your single copy is gone. Your proof is gone. With 1 copy in the cloud and 1 in a safe, you're protected. Marla could burn my house to the ground, and I'd still have the video of her crew doing it. With the observation net in place, it was time to bait the trap. They had an order waiting for an emergency, so I was going to give them the illusion of an opportunity. I sat at my desk and drafted a simple, polite email to the HOA office. To whom it may concern, I wrote, "This is a courtesy notice that I will be conducting maintenance on my private dock for the next several days, starting this Friday. There will be tools and equipment on the dock during this time." I hit send. It was the perfect bait. To them, it would look like I was distracted. My dock would be cluttered. My focus would be on repairs, not on them. It was a golden invitation to create the emergency they needed to get that court order signed. I was giving them the stage and daring them to walk onto it. The next few days were quiet. Too quiet. I spent my time out on the deck, cleaning my fishing gear, making it look like I was busy with normal chores. Frank's team was gone, the van was gone, but the new cameras were watching, and the observation post in the boathouse was ready. I just needed to wait for a sign. It came on Thursday afternoon. The air was still, the lake like glass. I was sitting on the deck, cleaning a reel, feeling the sun on my back. Then, from the corner of my eye, I saw it. On the far side of the lake, in the thick reeds where the public land met the water, there was a sudden, violent explosion of movement. Every single bird, the herons, the egrets, the blackbirds, flushed at once, taking to the sky in a panicked cloud. A deer or a coyote might startle a few birds, but to flush the whole flock, 100 birds at once, that wasn't an animal. That was a boat, sliding into the reeds with its engine off. It was a person, moving stealthily through the brush. A normal person would have missed it. A normal person would have just seen a flock of birds, but I saw it for what it was. A signal. They were scouting my bait. They had seen my email, and they were back, hiding in the same spot as before, planning their next move. The cold, calm feeling returned. The wait was almost over. They thought they were being clever, hiding in the shadows. They had no idea I was sitting in the light, watching them plan their own downfall. The next morning, my neighbor, Earl Maddox, walked across the lawn, separating our properties. His face etched with a look I hadn't seen on him before. Deep, quiet anger. He didn't say, "Hello." He just held out a piece of paper. "Found this tacked to my dock post this morning," he said, his voice low and gravelly. "It's got your address on it. I figured they put it on mine by mistake, hoping I'd be the one to bring it to you." A friendly, neighborly warning. I took the paper. It was a single sheet, a little damp from the morning dew. At the top, in a bold, slightly blurry font, was the title, "Official Notice of Mandatory Dock Inspection." The notice claimed to be from the County Water Safety Board, and stated that due to reports of potential structural instability, my dock required an immediate inspection. The inspection was scheduled for the next day, Friday, the very day I had told the HOA I would be doing maintenance. It was perfect. Too perfect. They weren't just creating an emergency. They were using my own courtesy email as the blueprint for their crime. This notice was their key. It was their excuse to be on my property, their justification for the tow barge, and the cornerstone of the fraudulent court order they had waiting in the wings. I looked at the document again, this time with a trained eye. The paper felt cheap. The logo for the county board was a little pixelated, probably copied from a website, but to the average person, it looked legitimate. It had official-sounding phrases like, "pursuant to county code," and "failure to comply may result in penalties." At the bottom was a scrawled signature above a typed name, Mark T. Finnegan, Chief Inspector, and a phone number to call with any questions. This piece of paper was a work of art, if your art was fraud. Earl watched me, his expression grim. "Doesn't smell right, does it, Jack?" I shook my head. "No, Earl, it smells like a trap. This is where most people get caught. They see an official-looking notice, they feel a surge of panic, and they make the biggest mistake possible. They call the number printed on the form. But you never ever do that. That number is part of the lie. It's a closed loop, designed to keep you inside their system, talking to their people, who will only confirm the lie. The second rule of proving a case is this: always call the issuing agency directly. You don't use their information. You find the real agency's number on your own, from an official government website or a phone book. You step outside their fabricated world and into the real one. I went inside, sat at my desk, and looked up the official number for the County Water Safety Department. A polite woman answered. I told her I had received an inspection notice and wanted to verify it. "Of course," she said. "What's the name of the inspector who signed it?" "Mark T. Finnegan." I read from the sheet. There was a pause and the sound of typing. "Sir, we don't have anyone by that name working here," she said. "We do have a chief inspector, but his name is Mark Finney, Finney. They misspelled it on your form. One crack in the foundation. Could you describe his signature for me?" I asked. "Does it look like a complicated scribble, or is it fairly clear?" She laughed lightly. "Oh, it's a mess. We joke that it just looks like a series of jagged loops. The signature on my paper was a neat, readable scrawl. 2 cracks. Now for the final piece. Just to be sure, can I read you the phone number on this notice?" I asked. "Just to see if it's an old number for one of your departments." I read her the number. "No, sir," she said firmly. "That number has never been associated with any county office that I'm aware of." The foundation had just crumbled. I thanked her for her time and hung up. The notice in my hand was no longer a threat. It was evidence. For the sake of complete documentation, I picked up my phone one more time and dialed the number from the fake notice. I put the call on speaker. A cheerful, automated voice filled the room. "Thank you for calling the community hotline. Your call is important to us. For the HOA office, please press 1. I hung up without pressing anything. The circle was complete. The fraudulent county notice, designed to authorize their trespass, listed the HOA's own phone number as the point of contact. They weren't just clumsy, they were arrogant. They had handed me the entire conspiracy on a single sheet of paper. And then, as if on cue, my computer dinged. It was an email. The sender was a name I didn't recognize, from a local law firm. The subject line read, "Urgent. Implied access rights to community waterways." My heart didn't beat faster. It steadied. This was it. The final piece. The email was from Marla Jeffers' lawyer. It was 3 paragraphs of dense legal text. But the message was brutally simple. It claimed that under the HOA's governing covenants, the association possessed implied access rights to all property adjoining the lake, even private property, like mine, in the event of an emergency. An emergency, it specified, could include a dock deemed a hazard to navigation, or an improperly secured watercraft. It was their legal air cover. First, they fabricate an emergency with a forged notice. Then, when I'm busy with my maintenance, they swoop in, claiming their lawyer had already established their right to be there. They thought they were building an unbreakable legal fortress. They were wrong. They were confessing. They had just put their entire criminal strategy in an email and sent it directly to me. I sat back in my chair and stared at the screen. All the pieces were on the board. The scouting footage, the neighbor's testimony, the forged notice, the link to the HOA phone line, and now, a legal threat that spelled out their exact plan. I moved my mouse and clicked reply. My fingers were steady on the keyboard. I didn't address their legal claims or their threats. I just typed one single sentence. A message aimed directly at Marla and her attorney. It was a sentence that told them I knew everything. I hit send. The message flew across the internet, a digital shot across their bow. An emergency you planned, it read, is not an emergency. There was no reply to my email. I didn't expect one. A message like that isn't for conversation. It's to let your enemy know that you see their whole plan laid out on the table. It's a tool to make them nervous, to make them rush. And when people rush, they make mistakes. The rest of the day was quiet, but it was a heavy, charged quiet, like the air before a lightning strike. The sun went down, and the familiar darkness settled over the lake. But tonight, it felt different. It wasn't empty. It was waiting. At 11:47 p.m. on Friday night, my kitchen clock, casting a faint glow on the wall, Frank Calder's team slipped back onto my property as silently as ghosts. They didn't use a van this time. They parked a quarter-mile down the road and came in on foot, emerging from the tree line like they were part of the shadows themselves. They wore dark clothing, no reflective surfaces, and moved with an economy of motion that only comes from years of practice. We didn't speak in the house. We spoke with hand signals and quiet nods. Every piece of equipment had been staged earlier. Every man knew his position. Frank, carrying a small, heavy pack, gave me a single affirmative nod before heading straight for the boathouse. He climbed the narrow ladder into the loft and vanished. A moment later, my discreet earpiece crackled to life, a whisper of static. Observation 1 in position. I have eyes on the entire dock and a clean line of sight to the north and east approaches. The floodlight remote is green. His voice was flat, calm, the sound of a man at work. A second man, a compact former recon specialist named Mike, melted into the dense brush along the shoreline, near where my property met Earl's. He set up a low-profile camera tripod and a directional microphone that could pick up a conversation on the dock as clearly as if he were standing next to them. Observation 2 in position. His voice whispered in my ear, "Audio is hot." The third team member, Dave, was already on the water. Earlier in the evening, under the cover of dusk, he had paddled a small, dark-colored John boat into a cluster of weeping willows on the far side of my cove. The boat was moored in deep shadow, completely invisible from the lake. From his position, he had a direct, water-level view of my dock, a perspective that would capture the side of Beasley's tow barge and the faces of anyone on it. Observation 3, in position, he confirmed, ready to record. I stood on my back deck, a thermos of black coffee in my hand. From my vantage point, I could see nothing but the placid, moonlit water. Frank, Mike, and Dave were perfectly hidden, a three-point net of silent witnesses. The bait, my boat, tethered to the dock with a few tools scattered nearby to sell the maintenance story, sat under the soft glow of a single security light. We were ready. The minutes ticked by, turning into an hour. The only sounds were the chirp of crickets and the occasional deep croak of a bullfrog. The air grew cooler. I poured a cup of coffee from the thermos, the steam rising into the night. As I stood there, watching the moonlight dance on the water, a wave of memory washed over me. I remembered Sarah on a night just like this, years ago. We were sitting on the end of the dock, her head on my shoulder, just watching the stars. She said the lake was our own private piece of quiet, in a world that was getting too loud. She loved this water, this view, this deep and abiding peace. A swell of something hot and fierce rose in my chest. Marla Jeffers and her crew, they didn't just see a boat, They saw an asset, a target. They didn't see the years of memories, the quiet mornings, the sacredness of a place that held the ghost of my wife's laughter. They thought they were coming to take a piece of property. They had no idea they were trespassing on hallowed ground. "This is her water too," I whispered to the night, and I would not let them defile it. The clock ticked past midnight. Then 1 a.m. The world slept. Or, at least, the honest part of it did. My earpiece remained silent. The stillness itself became a kind of pressure. In the old days, these were the moments that chewed up young cops. The waiting, the not knowing, the endless silence where your mind can start to play tricks on you. Frank's voice crackled, soft and low. "You good, Jack?" He was a good team leader. He knew when to check in. "Steady," I replied, my voice just as quiet. I took another sip of coffee. I looked up at the loft window of the boathouse. I couldn't see him, but I knew he was there, watching. That's what this was all about. Watching, documenting, building a cage of their own actions, their own words, their own crimes. Just after 2 a.m., it came. Not a roar, but a high, thin whine, slicing through the night from far across the lake. It was the distinct sound of a small outboard motor running at low RPMs, trying to be quiet but failing. It grew steadily louder, a hornet's buzz in the sleeping world. It was them. The trap was set. The wolves were coming to the bait. The whine of the outboard motor cut out abruptly, leaving a ringing silence in its wake. The digital clock in the kitchen now read 2:13 a.m. Through my window, I saw the dark shape of Ron Beasley's tow barge, gliding the last few feet toward my dock, its momentum carrying it silently through the black water. The lack of engine noise was professional. It was a move meant to avoid waking a sleeping homeowner until it was too late. But I was not sleeping. My earpiece was silent, but I could feel the coiled readiness of my team. Every camera was recording. Every microphone was listening. The barge nudged the pilings with a soft bump. Beasley was the first one off, moving with a familiar, brutish confidence. He was followed by his younger partner and one other person, a woman in a matching jacket who I recognized from HOA meetings. It was Linda, the association's treasurer, Marla Jeffers' closest ally. Her presence confirmed this came from the very top. They weren't just hired hands. This was the command staff, on site to supervise their prize. They moved like they had a right to be there, their flashlights cutting sharp white beams through the darkness. Beasley carried a heavy pair of bolt cutters. His partner held a clipboard. Even from the deck, I could see the document on top was a chain of custody form, the kind we used for evidence. And pre-filled at the top, in neat block letters, was my name. This was the pinnacle of their arrogance. They had brought the paperwork for the crime with them. My earpiece gave a soft crackle. It was Mike, from his position in the shoreline brush. "Got 'em," he whispered. Clear audio. He just told her to watch this. Another crackle, this time from Dave, in the John boat. Have a clear shot of the barge name and all three faces. Rolling. Finally, from the boathouse loft above them, Frank's voice was as steady as a rock. "Center frame. Let 'em commit." This was the moment. The point where they crossed the line from planning a crime to actively committing one. Beasley stepped up to my boat. He didn't even hesitate. He took the heavy steel lock in one hand and the bolt cutters in the other. He positioned the jaws of the cutters around the shackle of the lock, the same lock that secured the boat Sarah and I had spent so many summer afternoons on. My neighbor, Earl, was positioned just beyond the fence line between our properties, hidden by a large azalea bush. He wasn't on the radio, but I knew he was there, his phone recording a clear, unobstructed view of the whole scene. He was a witness, a citizen standing up for his neighbor. Beasley squeezed the handles of the bolt cutters. There was a loud, sharp snap that echoed across the water, a sound of finality. The lock fell to the dock with a heavy clatter. They had done it. They had willfully destroyed my property in the act of trying to steal more of it. They were no longer just trespassers. They were criminals, caught in the act. Before Beasley could even hook a chain to my boat, I gave the signal. It wasn't a word. It was just a double click on my own earpiece transmitter. 200 feet away, in the loft of the boathouse, Frank Calder hit a switch. A blinding, high-wattage floodlight erupted from the loft window, bathing the entire dock in a searing white glare, normally reserved for prison yards. It was like daylight had exploded from a cannon. Beasley, Linda, and the younger man froze, hands flying up to shield their eyes. They were momentarily blind, trapped in the center of a stage they didn't know existed. I stepped out from the shadows of my deck and walked calmly down the lawn toward them. My phone held up, its own camera recording. "Ron Beasley," I said, my voice cutting through their panicked confusion. It wasn't a shout. It was a command. "You and your associates are trespassing on private property and have just committed felony destruction of property." Linda squinted, her face a mask of disbelief and rage. "We have a right to be here. This is an HOA emergency action," she screeched, still blinded by the light. "Your emergency is a fraud," I said, my voice never rising, "and the sheriff's office has already been notified. In fact, I believe they're here." As if on cue, 2 sets of headlights flared to life at the end of my long driveway, sweeping across the front of the house. 2 patrol cars from the county sheriff's office rolled to a quiet stop behind the house. Doors opened and shut. The flashing blue and red lights began their silent, strobing dance, painting the trees in pulses of color. Sergeant Dana Cole walked around the side of the house, followed by 2 deputies. She wasn't rushing. Her movements were calm, deliberate, and final. She held a copy of the forged inspection notice in her hand. Beasley's face went from rage to pale, slack-jawed fear. Linda tried to turn away, to hide her face from the floodlight, and the approaching officers, a primal instinct to become invisible. But there was nowhere to hide. "Well, well," Dana said, her voice carrying easily in the night air. "Looks like we found the County Water Safety Board. Ron Beasley, you're under arrest." One of the deputies stepped forward and pulled Beasley's hands behind his back. The sharp, metallic click of the handcuffs snapping shut was the most satisfying sound I had heard in years. It was the sound of accountability. "You have no right," Linda stammered, pointing a shaking finger at me. "This is entrapment." Dana just shook her head. "Ma'am, planning a crime for 3 weeks isn't entrapment. We have the footage. We have the forged documents. We have your text messages." She nodded to the other deputy. "Her, too." As the deputy cuffed a sputtering Linda, Dana turned to me, her expression grim but satisfied. She lowered her voice slightly. "Just so you know, Jack," she said, nodding toward the defeated crew, "this isn't just about tonight. The DA's office has been looking at the HOA's books for months. This little stunt of theirs, it's the final piece. The deputies who transported them won't be booking them on simple trespass." She paused for effect, letting me know the real victory was at hand. "They'll be booking them on charges related to an ongoing investigation into racketeering." The word hung in the air, heavier than any anchor. It wasn't just about my boat anymore, it was about everything. The whole corrupt house of cards was coming down. The final scene didn't play out in a grand courtroom with a jury and a gavel. There were no reporters, no gallery full of spectators. The end came quietly, in a sterile, beige-walled conference room at the county courthouse. It was a place that smelled of old paper and stale coffee. A room designed for outcomes, not drama. I sat on one side of a long, polished table. On the other side sat Marla Jeffers. She wasn't the polished, confident HOA president anymore. Her designer suit looked a size too big for her. Her face was pale, stripped of the smug certainty it had worn for years. Between us sat her lawyer, a man whose expensive briefcase couldn't hide the fact that he was there to manage a surrender, not fight a battle. My friend and lawyer sat next to me, a thick stack of files in front of him, but he never needed to open them. The evidence had already done its work. The video from the boathouse, the audio from the shoreline, the forged inspection notice, my email exchange with her lawyer, it was an airtight case. The racketeering charges from the district attorney's office, built on a foundation of her crew's own greed, was the hammer that broke everything. Marla had been given a choice: face a trial that would almost certainly end with a long prison sentence, or take the deal the DA had put on the table. She chose the deal. Her lawyer pushed a document in front of her. It was the settlement agreement. I watched as Marla picked up a pen, her hand trembling almost imperceptibly. She didn't look at me. She didn't look at anyone. She just stared at the papers as if they were a death warrant. The first page she signed was her public resignation from the HOA board, effective immediately. The second was the restitution agreement. My lawyer had calculated the total with painstaking detail. The number was $42,700. It covered the full replacement cost of my high-security lock, the estimated value of Earl's 2 stolen kayaks, and the fraudulent $500 invoice Mrs. Press. Gable had been forced to pay for the unneeded repairs to her dock. It also covered the legal fees for me and my neighbors, ensuring we weren't out a single penny for defending our own homes. But the most important page was the last one. It was a binding clause, an amendment to the HOA covenants themselves. It stated, in clear and simple language, that the Homeowners Association had no authority, none whatsoever, over the private shorelines, docks, or watercraft of deeded lakefront properties. The HOA's reach would forever stop where our private property began. With a few strokes of her pen, Marla Jeffers was signing away the very power she had abused. This is the final step, the part that so many people miss. It's how you make sure the fight stays won. You must always get the settlement terms in writing. A promise is just air. An email is better, but it can be argued. A piece of paper, signed, notarized by a court official, and filed with the county clerk, that is real. That is a permanent record. It's a wall the other side can never climb over again. They can't come back next year with a new board president and try the same thing, because the rule itself has been changed. The victory is written into the law of the community. We weren't just getting our money back, we were taking back the ground for good. She signed the last page, her signature a spidery, defeated scrawl. She slid the papers back across the table. Her lawyer gathered them, put them neatly in his briefcase, and stood up. Marla stood with him, a ghost in her own life. She walked out of the room without a word, her reign of petty tyranny over, not with a bang, but with the quiet scratch of a pen on paper. A few evenings later, I was back at the lake. The air was cool, and the setting sun painted the sky in streaks of orange and purple. The ugly tow barge was gone. The fake lake patrol vests were gone. The fear was gone. Earl Maddox was on my dock with me. So were a few other neighbors who had been targeted by Marla's schemes. We weren't having a party. We were working. Earl, with his builder's know-how, was helping me install new, brighter lights on the dock posts. Another neighbor was helping rewire the connections, his hands sure and steady. Mrs. Gable had brought over a pitcher of iced tea and was sitting in a deck chair, watching us with a small, peaceful smile on her face. We were restoring the dock lights together, a quiet, simple act of community. It was the opposite of what the HOA had become. We weren't invoicing each other. We weren't filing violations. We were just neighbors helping neighbors, the way it's supposed to be. When we finished, we flipped the switch. The new lights glowed warm and strong, pushing back the gathering darkness, their reflection shimmering on the calm water. I stood at the end of my dock, looking out at the last sliver of sun disappearing below the hills. This place, this water, it felt right again. It felt clean. The quiet wasn't heavy anymore. It was full of peace. I thought about Sarah, and I knew she would have loved this. She would have loved seeing our neighbors here, sharing in the quiet victory. They thought this lake was just another asset, a line item on a budget they could control. They thought it was theirs to take. But they were wrong. Water remembers who it belongs to. It belongs to the quiet mornings, to the fishermen, to the children who learned to swim here. It belongs to the memories of people like Sarah. It belongs to those who respect it. The gentle, rhythmic lapping of the water against the pilings of the dock was the only sound in the twilight. It was the sound of peace. It was the sound of home. And then, everything was quiet.